Hello and welcome to this, which is our fourth webinar podcast in the Smart Building series for 2018. And today we are talking about data-driven decision-making for flexible workspaces, commercial workspaces. And I'm really happy to have Roee Peled from PointGrab on the call. Hi, Roee, how are you?
Hi, James. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, really happy that you could join us for today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, great. And Roee is going to be going through some slides for us and discussing how we can use data to make better decision makings in commercial office and retail office spaces. So what I want to do first is just a little bit of housekeeping. We like to make this as interactive as possible. So if there are any questions, please type them in, and I will get them here, and then I'll be able to put those questions to Roee, or indeed if you have questions for myself after his presentation. We have plenty of time to talk after that. Also, if you want to listen again or get the slides, they will be up on not just on our website but also on iTunes. We have the podcast will be up. Also SoundCloud, there'll be the recording, and we'll put the slides on YouTube and also SlideShare. So all of the content you're going to see will be available afterwards. And finally, I need to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, and that's Project Haystack. And they are an open source project for semantically tagging data for Internet of Things, and that's all about simplifying data that we're getting from Internet of Things systems. So if you guys are interested in finding out more about what they're doing, please go to project-haystack.org. That's project-haystack.org to get more information. So with that out of the way, let's get started with the presentation. Roee, perhaps you could start by just giving us an overview of yourself and also PointGrab and what you guys are doing at the moment.
Okay, so thank you, James, for this introduction. My name is Roee Peled. I'm sales executive at PointGrab. Just to give again a brief overview about PointGrab, where we started and where we are at today. So PointGrab was actually established 10 years ago. It started off as a software house developing gesture recognition software, mainly for consumer electronic devices like smart TVs, smartphones, tablets, and so on. But about 3 years ago, we decided to take this technology and apply it to a different marketplace, a different product, which is what we've been doing since. And our platform, CogniPoint, is a smart sensing platform for smart buildings. And our main focus in the last years have been around commercial real estate, mainly smart office buildings. The company has about 45 people, mainly located in Israel. We have a small sales office in the US, and we are backed by several leaders in the industry. Philips Lighting is one of them, ABB, and Flextronics as well. And our products have already been rolled out. Our platform has been rolled out globally, and we already have several integrations with application service providers and building management systems and building utility systems worldwide as part of these projects and pilots. So again, a brief overview about PointGrab. And what I would like to do next is give you a bit of a view into how we see the market today, the workspace market, the problems facing it, and what kind of solutions we bring to the market, which are based on very rich and informative data on how occupants are using this workspace. So if we take an overview of what is happening today or on the traditional workspace, and I guess most of you are familiar with the numbers. So the traditional workplaces usually suffer from significant underutilization. There are a lot of researchers and market analysis that has been done on this subject, and most of these show that most of the workspaces are significantly underutilized. The optimistic ones usually show 30 to 40% underutilization, but our feeling and our realistic view on this is that the issue is much more severe. So we're talking about 50 to 60% underutilization, and this relies on a lot of data that we've been able to collect over time in different pilots and rollouts that we've done during the last few years. With that in mind, there is currently a trend that is starting. It's relatively in an embryonic stage from a market perspective, but a lot of these workplaces are now turning to find solutions which are more flexible, more agile. And I will take this view again from different angles during the presentation, but the workplace will started off from viewing how I can make the space more efficient, and now the use cases that are being talked about are more about employee-centric use cases. So how to make life in the workspace more convenient and more comfortable for the employee or for the worker. And a lot of the use cases are centered around the well-being and the comfort of the worker. We also see these use cases, which I talked about the well-being and the comfort, they are sourced from the issues of productivity and the fact that with traditional workspaces, you have problems of collaboration, of teamwork, and an overall feeling of negativity from the employee due to the structure of the workplace, due to the availability of resources such as meeting rooms and workplaces. And this is the source for this trend to turn into more flexible and agile workspaces. So I mentioned the reasons, or some of the reasons, and also that the trend is now starting. And we hear and we see again from different research groups, and also hearing from our customers, that about 60% of companies are now planning or moving towards flexible workplaces, or will apply some kind of agile workplace strategy by 2020, and which they hope will reflect on the productivity and the well-being of the employee. But in order to reach this aim or this target, most of these customers or most of these corporates don't actually know what's going on currently in their workplace. So they will produce different data from surveys that they do internally, and where their employees would say that meeting rooms are 100% taken up, and it can take ages to book a meeting room or to find a place, when in actual fact, the meeting rooms are 30% occupied, and in these 30%, they are not fully utilized. So you will have a meeting room of 30 to 40 people, which is usually populated by up to 5 people. So the question is, what is actually going on in my specific workplace, and how can I get this data in order to analyze it and see how I can improve on the current situation? So these corporates or these companies, they say, well, I will move into a smart environment, or I will turn my building into a smart building, and I will rely on sophisticated building management systems and sophisticated applications that will enable me to run these different use cases and applications to turn my building into a smart building. And the graph that you see in front of you is actually taken from the last Memoori Occupancy and Analytics research that was produced in January 2018. And you see there the abundance of applications and systems that are available in the market today. There are over 130 such systems. But one thing that is missing, or one thing that is essential for these systems to run on, is rich informative data. And the question is, how do I get this data, or what is the underlying layer that is required in order to provide these applications with this rich data? Of course, once you provide this rich data, and the richer the data, the better, these applications and these use cases come into play and will allow the customers to use this to analyze the data in a much more efficient way, and then apply different applications, different services to the employees in order to make the workplace a much better place. Now, there are traditional systems in the market that provide some insights into the occupancy, but these traditional systems tend to be either not accurate enough or not provide enough rich data. And the kind of data that we're looking into is starting from the basic count of how many people are there, their location, their trend on how they are moving about the space, where they tend to locate, where they tend to huddle up or collaborate, and how they tend to interact. And providing this rich data to the application layer makes it possible to apply different use cases and different services, which will make the life of the employee and the collaboration much more effective and worthwhile. So just to give an idea of what kind of data we're looking at, the graphs you're seeing here is from a pilot or from a survey we were running with one of our customers. We installed some of our sensors over a designated area in their office and started collecting data on the usage of the office resources, whether it was meeting rooms or whether it was specific desks. And these are two examples out of tens of reports that can be issued and provided based on the data, with which just give you a good picture or a good insight of the kind of information and the kind of analytics that you can get out of such system. So the first graph on the left showed you a bar chart of the meeting rooms which were monitored by the PointGrab system. We actually monitored about 10 meeting rooms for that customer, and the data that we collected, the data shown here, is just from the first week of data collected. It was a normal working week, so obviously not during a holiday or not before or after a holiday, but a normal working week. And the data is based on data collected during the working days and during the working hours. So of course we don't relate to weekends, and we don't relate to out of work hours. So the first graph on the left shows you usability of meeting rooms. You can see that most meeting rooms were completely underutilized. The most used room, which is marked here on the CP7 meeting room, is actually a meeting room for 20 people. But the maximum people that used it at any one meeting was 5. So only a quarter of the space was used. And on average, there was less than one person counted in that room during the data collection hours, which is during the working days and working hours. You see that other meeting rooms are even underutilized more than that. And there were additional ones which are out of these graphs, which were practically empty throughout the data collection period. We had specific peaks at certain times of day, and we found out that these meeting rooms were actually used for 15-minute phone calls or for eating lunch. And that gave an insight to this customer into how much these meeting rooms are completely underutilized, and again, a chance to plan more efficiently and optimize their use. The second report on the right looked at the open spaces on the hot desking areas of the floor. One of the features of the PointGrab sensor is that you can actually divide the field of view or split the field of view into areas of interest which are down to a desk or chair level granularity. And what we did in that space is actually look at each and every desk to see its utilization and how busy it is throughout the day and throughout the week. And you see that there are literally empty desks that have been recognized. Other desks are have very low utilization. And we could also provide an hourly graph of a specific desk. So the orange one is one of the busier desks. So you can see that during the morning hours, it has a very high occupancy rate, which goes down obviously towards lunchtime, then picks up again in the early afternoon, and then towards the end of the day, it drops down. And we compared it to another desk, which was literally empty throughout the day, with a very small peak around 2 p.m., where people would usually gather around either to eat or to eat their lunch or for a small coffee break. But besides that, the desk was completely unused. So these are the kinds of insights that you can get by collecting very rich data, and which can give you a very deep view into the utilization of the resources in the workplace. So some of the key features that we use in our system, which allows us to flexibly monitor and collect data from the floor space. I mentioned before that one of the capabilities is to actually split the field of view of the sensor into separate areas of interest. This allows you a very dynamic use of the sensor in different applications, whether it's a meeting room where you use a single area of interest to count and view the location of the people within the meeting room, or whether you are applying this sensor in an open space, whether it's an open space with a hot desking application or in just a free sitting space, and you can apply an area of interest to the desk level granularity or to a chair level granularity, and each such area of interest will report independently to the sensor above it. And again, that gives you the flexibility to change the setup and to apply the sensor to a specific use case. Another aspect is counting how many people are walking over a certain threshold. We call this feature traffic line. So basically, you can apply a single or multiple traffic lines within each sensor and get a count in both directions. So one count for inbound and one count for outbound traffic. And one of the interesting use cases that is used, that is applied to this feature, is to place a sensor in front of the washrooms and commission a traffic line in front of the men's, one traffic line in front of the women's, and one traffic line in front of the disabled. Count how many people are walking in and out of the washroom, and then automate the facility management. So call the cleaning services automatically once a certain threshold count has been passed. And this obviously makes the facility management much more efficient. So rather than sending the cleaning needlessly every 2 hours, you can do that based on usage. Now, of course, talking about the flexibility, sometimes you have very large meeting rooms or auditoriums or very large open spaces where several sensors are needed in order to cover the entire space. So what we can provide is what we call sensor independent areas. So for example, in a large meeting room, when you need to use 2 sensors to cover the entire meeting room, you can actually aggregate the data from both sensors using a single area of interest which transcends across these sensors. And the system will obviously take care of both the aggregation as well as making sure there are no duplicates in the overlapping areas between the sensors. Another application or use case can be for security measures to make sure that the capacity on the floor doesn't pass the security regulations or the fire regulations. And then you can cover the floor space with sensors and aggregate the data from all of the sensors to give a total count on the amount of people that are located on that floor at any one time. So again, I suppose, and again, our inputs for customers, we are getting a lot of inputs regarding new use cases and new applications. But again, these are two examples that again show the flexibility and what can be done with the data that is supplied by the sensors. Just to review some of the additional capabilities of the PointGrab CogniPoint sensors, we went over some of these and already mentioned some of these features, but as a whole, the platform can provide very rich and informative data on how occupants are using the space. It can provide it both as historical data for utilization studies or as real-time data for applications such as booking systems. And the type of data that we provide includes counting how many people are actually there, their location, and the traffic lines that I mentioned before. The system relies on computer vision and deep learning algorithms. And as you can see from the picture on the right, the sensor includes a small camera. But having said that, the system has been designed to be completely non-intrusive and private. Each sensor is an edge analytics device. It includes a quad-core processor within each sensor, which performs the image processing and the analytics of every image or every frame that the camera sees. And once this frame is analyzed, it's completely discarded. So the platform doesn't store or transmit any images. The only data that is transmitted from the sensors to the cloud management system and then to third-party applications is what we call process data. So for example, it will include a text-like file with the timestamp, the amount of people there, their XY location, maybe a count of in and outs if we are using traffic lines, but certainly we don't store or transmit any images. The system actually went through severe penetration testing by a third-party independent company, which tried to hack into both the sensors and the cloud management system, mainly trying to export images out of it, and was completely unsuccessful. And we are more than happy to share this pen test report with any customer or partner that asks for it. The field of view of each sensor can reach up to 48 square meters, which is a relatively wide field of view, and includes the split, which I mentioned before, of splitting the field of view into areas of interest. All of the sensors are managed by a cloud-based or private cloud management system that can commission and control the devices, perform health monitoring, issue firmware upgrades and updates, and also provide a REST API with the data towards third-party applications. The idea here is that if you want to add new use cases or new features, there is no need to touch the hardware. Everything is done through remote upgrades and again managed through the cloud management system. So from a data flow perspective, the sensors are monitoring specific spaces or specific areas, processing the data on board, and then issuing this processed data to the CogniPoint management system, which, as I mentioned, is responsible for the commissioning, for the health monitoring, for the updates, as well as the REST API connection to third-party applications. And this is where we touch the different use cases. So these use cases can range from space management applications or facility management applications, building control applications like controlling the lighting and the HVAC through the building management system based on the data collected or data collected and provided by the sensors. And again, the list of use cases keeps on expanding as we are discussing this system with new partners and new customers. Touching these use cases, so we managed to group them into 4 major target use cases, and I will start from left to right. So the basic and most initial use cases that is mostly used by our customers, and I also mentioned this at the beginning, is understanding what is actually going on in my workplace. So this is in order to apply to workplace optimization and planning use cases. You can rely on utilization data collected over time in order to improve the office layout, change its layout in order to facilitate more space where needed, and use spaces which are underutilized in a better way. Another use case is what we call dynamic workspace management, and this is based more on real-time applications. So you can take the data collected by the sensors in real time and provide it to booking systems for meeting rooms or for hot desking applications. Within each sensor, you can actually monitor up to 10 desks, which allows you a lot of flexibility and saves you a lot in CapEx and OpEx from a rollout perspective. And one of the interesting use cases that we see in this application is what is called reserved no-show. So there are a lot of cases when someone reserved a meeting room but didn't show up to the meeting, and now the meeting room is booked in the system. What you can do with the real-time data is actually configure the system or the application to check whether after 5 minutes no one showed up. You can free the meeting room in the system, and obviously that improves the availability of the meeting rooms, it improves the productivity of the people, and also their well-being. These are the basic use cases, and on top of that, we see more advanced use cases, starting with the smart facility management. So I mentioned before, you can connect the system to building management system or building automation systems to provide on-demand ambience control based on the occupancy, so controlling the ventilation or the air conditioning or the lighting based on the occupancy in that specific space. I mentioned some safety applications, so counting how many people are on the floor and making sure it's not more than the regulation, and optimize other services which are more usage-based, whether it's cleaning the washrooms, calling elevators when noticing that a large group of people are moving towards the elevator lobby, improving catering services, or giving a view into the cafeteria or restaurant in order that the employee can see whether there are any spaces available and how long the queue is in front of the cashier. So again, some examples of use cases and applications where these services can be applied to. And there are additional employee-centric services which again rely on the real-time capability of the system to provide the employees with insights into the availability of on-site services. For example, in a lot of large corporates, there are internal travel agents or IT services, and before going to get service from these places, you want to make sure that there is someone there, or to check how long the queue is and the availability of these services. So certainly data provided by the sensors which are rolled out across the floor can provide this kind of data to the relevant applications. So that's the overview that I wanted to provide. One more thing, if there are any questions, James, then might be a good time now to answer some of them before we move on to a short demo of the management system.
Yeah, sure. So if anyone has any questions for Roy, please type them in. and we can handle them. Roy, I suggest you could go ahead with the demo of the management system.
Okay, so let me just switch over to the screen. So, James, do you think, can you see?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you see this? Okay, so what I'm showing now is the CogniPoint or the CogniPoint Cloud Management System. This is a live data feed from the system of our floor space here in Israel from our offices. The floor plan you're seeing includes some sensors which we installed in some of the rooms for demo purposes and for testing purposes. The green circles show the location of these sensors, so I can hover over the sensors and get their name, get their status, their last reporting period. I can also show the detection area of each sensor. So the gray rectangles that you are seeing now is actually the theoretical field of view, because obviously the sensor cannot see through walls. But in case it was an open space, this is the coverage area or the detection area of that specific sensor. I mentioned the areas of interest. So the green circle, the green rectangles that you are seeing now are the areas of interest within each sensor. So for example, in this office, you can see 2 desks. Each of them is a separate area of interest, and the count that each of them is providing to that sensor, along with an icon of the location of that person. So if I hover over that person on the bottom left, you will be able to see the local XY location. And of course, this kind of data can be exported through the API of the system to third-party applications. Here we have a meeting room. It's quite late in the afternoon now, so it's currently empty. There are no meeting there. There is one person that just walked in. And the count will update in 1 minute. The reporting interval is 1 minute. And you see another office here with 4 desks, so 4 areas of interest. And we can see that only in one of the desks currently a person is sitting. So this is the kind of data that the system can produce and apply. And again, we talked about the different use cases and the different applications. And this data is used, it's the basis for these kinds of applications and use cases.
Yeah, it's really great. It's really interesting to see it update in real time as well.
Yeah, so you can see the movement, and again, relying on this data, you can, for example, one of the use cases that is being talked about by our partners more from the application layer is wayfinding, so or finding a colleague or checking collaboration between teams. So certainly this kind of data can help in providing these services.
And I'm saying, obviously, this is, this is an example from your office, but say for a client, how do they put this mapping data into the software, and then how do they also decide what are areas of interest? I mean, is that just part of the commissioning process that you do with them?
Yes, certainly. So this is part of the services that we provide or our channel partners provide to the end customer. All you need to do is import the floor plan, a scaled floor plan into the system. And then during the commissioning process, which is a one-time process, you configure these areas of interest based on the floor plan, based on the plan of the furniture, based on the use cases that you want to apply. So it can be a combination, like you see here, it can be a combination of meeting rooms and offices, or it can be an open space or a hot desking application. So depending on the use case and the furniture layout, we can help in the planning, or it's something that we train our partners to do. And you commission the devices. It's a very simple process. So as a rule of thumb, to install a commission a sensor is something between 4 to 5 minutes. So the process is very easy. And in larger rollouts, what usually our partners do is they pre-commission the management system. So they import the floor plans, they perform the planning in advance on the system, and then when it comes down to the physical installation of the sensor, you just install it, connect it to the web or connect it to the network, and then automatically the system will download the data to each and every sensor depending on its location and its setup.
Yeah, great. I've actually got a bunch more questions for you, but I've also had quite a lot come in from the floor, and they should probably take precedent. So,
okay.
Yeah, someone asking here, how are the sensors powered, and how do they communicate with the cloud platform? If that's wirelessly, which I'm assuming, how does it get the information?
Okay, so there are two options. From a powering perspective, it can rely either on PoE or DC. And from a connectivity perspective, again, either PoE or Ethernet or Wi-Fi. Usually it's the case that we plan in advance which type of sensor it is, whether it's PoE based or Wi-Fi based, because part of the production process that we do is to seal the devices with the ports or protocols which are not used. So if it's a PoE device, we seal or block the Wi-Fi option and vice versa. Mm-hmm. There are cases where the customer doesn't want to, connect to the corporate network, and then you can rely either on the guest Wi-Fi, or you can place 4G routers on the floor and connect to them through Wi-Fi. So there is flexibility in the way that you can provide connectivity to the sensors. There is no gateway required for the system itself, so each sensor connects independently to the cloud and reports independently to the cloud.
Okay, and I guess, as you explained before, because it's doing a lot of edge processing, there shouldn't be too much. You shouldn't be too data intensive on the network.
So the bandwidth consumption is very low. Again, since we are not transmitting any images, like you mentioned, just to give an example of a figure, a single sensor reporting every 1 minute interval and monitoring 4 areas of interest, like 4 desks, the bandwidth consumption will be 1.5 megabytes per day.
Yeah.
So very low bandwidth consumption.
Yeah. Another question here. What other points are being generated besides occupancy data?
So again, if the question is with regards to environmental sensing or other sensing capabilities, this is something that we are exploring at the moment. So in the next version of the hardware, to add more sensing capabilities. With regard to the current setup, we're providing the count, as I mentioned. We can provide the location. We have the traffic lines that provide in and out counting. We can provide through the system heat maps if required. There are a lot of hardware features in the sensor itself which are currently only hardware enabled and are not being exported through the software, but for example, Bluetooth capability, but if there is a need required, certainly these capabilities can be turned on.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really interesting when you can add as well more sensing capability, and I guess that's going to come in the future. So that'd be really interesting for things like health monitoring and air quality, which a lot of people are talking about.
Yes, and again, it very much depends on the demand from the market and how the market will evolve. Because again, as we see today, it's at the very early stage. So technology like this is it's a pretty disruptive technology in a very traditional market, and it takes time for the market to realize what kind of uses and what kind of application can be applied here. And you can see from a very early stage the type of applications that can rely on this rich data are keeping on expanding, and more are coming into play. So I guess as the market evolves, we will be able to provide more and more features and more capabilities from both the software platform as well from the hardware itself.
Absolutely. I think, we have to remember this is still a nascent market, and it's interesting to see how it's developing. And as we discussed in our report and you've shown, space utilization is obviously one a use case that's been identified quite early by people. And for example, I know you don't want to share any specific use cases or naming people, but are there customers that you have already that have shown what kind of payback they're getting from your system?
So we're with one of the customers, which is actually a relatively large deployment. We are now in the process of collecting this data, because obviously you need to collect this data in order to understand the ROI and what can be done with it. So we have a large customer in the UK that refurbished one of their buildings in central London, and it's a 16-floor building covering 24,000 square meters of office space, and we have covered basically the whole floor space. So there are over 1,000 sensors installed in that building, and they are providing data for different types of use cases. So starting from the basic meeting room utilization and hot desking or flexible workspace that this customer is rolling out, seeing utilization in the collaboration areas and availability of public areas like public seating, or open sofa places, or collaboration pods which they have throughout the space. We added the traffic light feature, which I mentioned before, with the for automating the facility management for the washrooms. So this is a feature we added in 2 months for this customer. They are using the sensors in the reception area to see how busy it gets at different times of day, and whether you need to add more personnel in the reception area. It's rolled out in the cafeteria, again, as to add in the future capabilities for the employees to see how busy it is at a certain time, and whether there are any tables available and how long the queue is. So these are the main use cases that are applied in this case. And again, we will be collecting data and issuing a case study based on this specific case. And other cases where we are rolled out, even though in smaller scales, you see that with the pilot that I showed before, it was a rollout of just 25 sensors, but the type of data and the amount of data that you can get just from 1 week of utilization.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? Especially, I think, some of the applications around facilities management. There's clearly a lot of opportunities there to optimize costs around, operating buildings. So it'd be great to see that information on ROI when you release it.
Sure.
I've got a bunch of questions coming in, so I better get through them.
Okay.
Why is there a concern for using video? And if you can't use the video, how do you know people are gathering in an area for a coffee break? I think probably go back to what you were talking about, it being anomalized. So maybe you could explain about how you anomalize the data.
Yeah. Well. First of all, from regarding the concern of privacy, it's a question that we get a lot. So once a camera is involved, there is usually a question about privacy. So the GDPR laws which are coming in, and there are countries where this is more of a concern than others. But again, this is a subject which needs to be addressed. From a design perspective of the system, this was almost the first requirement that the system was designed according to. So it was always in mind that the data needs to be anonymized, again, because you are working it's installed in a workplace, People are aware of privacy issues and cameras being installed around. And the way that we handle it is, like I mentioned before, in order not to transmit or to send any images or any videos, we had to turn the sensors into an edge analytics device. So that's probably the major advantage here, and the complexity in the system is actually to fit such capabilities, image processing and deep learning algorithms in such a small form factor.
Right. So kind of my understanding is that you take that video image frame by frame, and then you're able to determine from that image where somebody is, and then you don't use that image any further. It's deleted, and then what you're doing is then per frame you update that so you know where a person is, and that's
to give a more high level explanation of how this is being done. The deep learning algorithms that we use are there to identify or to distinguish between a human being and a static object. So for example, if you have a person sitting next to an empty chair, I want to only count that person and not to count the empty chair. And the deep learning algorithm, again, in a very high level, the deep learning algorithms are doing that based on the shape. So we are trying to recognize the head, the shoulders, the hands of a person sitting down, or if he's standing up, then the meeting point between the legs and the floor. And the way that we do that is we train the system to recognize different situations or different scenarios of human beings. We actually have very close to our office a very large hangar, which is like a film studio, where we basically filmed or videoed hundreds and thousands of movies, and then run them through the system and taught the system what human beings are and improve the accuracy of recognizing them. And this is actually how we benchmark our system from an accuracy perspective. Our stated accuracy is above 95%, and this relates to the algorithm's capability to recognize a human being in different situations.
Right. Yeah.
And again, everything is done on the sensor itself.
Yeah, and then what is transmitted back is basically the coordinates of that anonymized person.
It's first of all the count, so knowing how many people are actually there based on this identification by the algorithm, and again their XY location or the local XY location of each and every person.
Yeah. Another question here. For wayfinding or finding a colleague, that would imply that some of the data is not anonymous. But it's my understanding that this isn't for finding a colleague. It's just more for.
You can use the data and combine it with additional data in order to provide this kind of application.
Okay.
But again, of course, there are privacy issues here, and in most of the applications that provide this wayfinding or colleague finding capability, it's a feature which can be turned on or off depending on the requirement of the customer.
Right.
So again, we are a data enabling platform for such applications.
Yeah, they would have to opt into that kind of system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How are the sensors that monitor multiple locations calibrated? Is there an image that is displayed and areas are defined based on that image?
Does that refer to the independent or the independent area of interest which transcends several sensors? Is that?
Yes, I think. Yeah, when depending on, so for example, the sensor that monitors multiple locations. So yes.
Okay, so you mean multiple areas of interest?
Yeah.
Like in a hot desking application. So what was the question again?
How is that calibrated? How is the sensor calibrated to do that?
So again, it's an inherent part of the algorithms of the software. So once we commission these areas of interest, we commission them according to the field of view of that sensor. Each sensor obviously knows its XY location, and we build these areas of interest. Each area of interest has their own kind of XY coordinates, and based off that, they report back to the sensor.
Okay, got it. How is this sensor technology utilizing Project Haystack? Well, I'm not sure if it is. Project Haystack are the sponsor of our webinars for the whole year, but it certainly could be used. Project Haystack essentially allows you to semantically tag data coming from different systems, and then the idea being that it's easier to understand and easier to use for other systems.
So yeah, I would again, I think that Project Haystack is one layer above. So Project Haystack can digest the data that we provide and then tag it in whichever way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's an open source thing. So someone can go in and for example, I guess they could use your API to get the data out, and then they could tag it themselves. So that to use.
Yeah, and this is our mode of work. So we provide our REST API to our partners and to our technology partners in order to integrate into their system. So in very much the same way, it can be done with Project Haystack.
Yeah, absolutely. What have you seen as the sort of most popular third-party applications that people are interested in using the data that they're getting from these sensors?
So again, since it's an early stage, so it will usually start from collecting utilization data and then running it through different analytics or BI tools to understand what is actually going on currently. There are customers which are at a more advanced stage. So for example, if they decide in advance, I want the smartest building in the world with the smartest applications, then they would move also towards real-time applications like hot desking and like the employee-centric services that I mentioned, and connecting it to the building management system to control the HVAC and lighting based on the occupancy. But it will usually start initially from a utilization study, so to understand what's going on across the floor space. And then based on that, they will add more and more use cases or more advanced use cases as you move along.
Sure. What types of automated decision-making applications have been implemented using this technology?
So again, I mentioned before automating the facility management services. So whether it's, I mentioned the cleaning, it can be catering as well. You can also look at booking systems as a kind of automated service. So booking a meeting room based on whether it's currently occupied or not, or creating ad hoc meetings. Freeing up in the system reserved meeting rooms with no-shows. That's another automated use case that you can think about. In the case of hot desking, you have in many cases like a large kiosk in front of the floor. The person can come in and see in real time which desks are available, and then according to that book a place and go and sit at that desk. So these types of automated services.
Yeah, I'm assuming it could be used for things like controlling the lights, right? So, for example, someone's not in the room, you could turn off the lights.
Exactly, and then that relates to the building management or building automation platforms, depending what capabilities they inherently have in order to automate this.
Right, and there's actually a question about that here. How would your system communicate via the building automation system? So, for example, does it support BACnet?
No. So again, it will rely on the data that we provide through the REST API, and then the applications will digest the data and make the automatic decision making based on the data.
Okay.
So it's not that like you control these systems through our application. It's the applications taking decision based on the data.
Yes. So you're providing the data from the occupancy, and then it's up to that separate system to do something with
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
And is this hardware and software available for purchase right now? Well, I
Yes,
believe so.
yes, it's a completely. We have a full working production line, manufacturing 1,000 sensors almost every month. We can, of course, increase the capacity once demand goes up. And it's a general availability product. Yes, for sure.
How do you charge a customer? Is this a software as a service?
So
Like
it's a combination of 2 parts. So you have a one-time cost for the sensor, and you have a recurrent price for the data packages, depending on the use case. So if it's a single area of interest, it's a more basic package because it's a lower data. If it's a multiple areas of interest, it's a more advanced package because obviously there is more data being transmitted from the sensors to the cloud management system. But this is the structure. So a combination of a one-time cost for the sensor and recurrent data packages
for managing that data and the software on your cloud, on the cloud.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how have you seen sort of take up with this? Are there specific types of companies that are coming to you asking for these types of solutions? Where have you seen the most interest in these type of occupancy systems?
So it's a good question because first of all, our go-to-market strategy is to work through channel partners. So we would again theoretically not engage with the end customer, but rather work through channel partners, which are usually real estate service providers or facility management companies, or they can be also the application service providers who sorry, want to be the one-stop shop in front of their customers. But reality is stronger than the theory. So we do have engagement with the end customer, and it's a variety of industries. So it can be accounting and consulting firms, it can be banks, it can be high-tech or software corporates that have large buildings or large campuses and want to make it more efficient. The accounting and consulting side of the business is again, they have more flexible and agile type of work, so it makes more sense to them from a hot desking perspective. But it's really a wide variety of customers.
Yeah. And so centered around knowledge-based industries, I'm sure, because these are.
Yeah, we have customers in the automotive industry, for example. So it's a very wide combination. Usually, if you look at the characteristics of these customers, they tend to be very large corporates that have they are usually take up complete buildings, or they have several buildings in an area or globally, or they are tenants which take up several floors in a multi-story building.
Right. Roy, could we just move to the last slide, please, on the presentation?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I guess I just wanted to finish it off now. We've come to the end of our hour. Obviously, say thank you, Roy. If people want more information, how can they get hold of you, or where is the best point of contact at PointGrab?
So they can reach out to me directly to my email. So it's Roee P. Roee is ROEE and P like Peled at pointgrab.com. They can also reach us through the info box, which is info@pointgrab.com, and it will reach me as well. And you can share my contact details afterwards with the attendees.
Okay, will do. And thanks for taking part today. Really appreciate you taking the time to show us all.
My pleasure.
And as you mentioned, Roy, in the presentation, we have done a significant bit of work on occupancy analytics earlier this year. So if anyone wants to check that out, please go to our website. You can see we've written a lot about that over the last few months. And next webinar is going to be looking at creating digital twins of buildings, and that's going to be with Building IQ and Cypress Enviro Systems. So just stay tuned to our website for more information on the date for that, but that's going to be sometime in May. And really just remains me to say also thanks to Project Haystack for sponsoring this today. If you want more information about what they're doing, go to project-haystack.org. Thanks everybody for listening. And as I said before, this has been recorded, and we'll make sure it goes up on our website, also YouTube and SoundCloud, and you'll be able to also even get it through iTunes as well. Thanks a lot for listening. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.